Hey everybody, this is Dale with Stumbling Greenward. Today is International Passive House Day, and to do my part sharing the Passive House message, I have decided to do an interview series. So as part of that series, today we've got the gentleman who represented the team that helped build my house from ground to lockup. They specialize in passive house design, and we've got him in for an interview today. His name is Marcel Studer. He's been involved in passive house construction since 2006. He's been a co-owner of Econ Group since 2003, and they've always been committed to building green. So welcome, Marcel.
Thank you, Dale. Thanks for having me. Hi, everyone.
Absolutely. We're glad to have you here and giving up part of your Saturday to help talk about passive house and spread the message. So I've been starting all my interviews with the big question. If somebody asks you, what in the world is passive house, how do you describe it to them?
Well, I'll tell them it's an energy efficient building standard. And it's one of the most straightforward standards to work with because it only has a few criteria you got to work with. It's not very bureaucratic. You don't need to fill out tons of forms. And it's a base for going net zero, going energy plus. It's what everyone should be doing just to was interested in energy efficient building.
All right. So when you guys formed Econ in 2003, you said you'd always been committed to green building. Did that start right at the beginning? And why were you committed to green building? What made it a good idea for you?
Well, we were a young company, and we were kind of looking at to get an edge in the marketing and of our business, and being in this very beautiful corner of the world, it's kind of almost a no-brainer that you want to keep it that way and not keep polluting it, and want to have it for our kids and our kids' kids to be able to enjoy it. So it's been always on our minds, and it's definitely the biggest motivation is to do something, that we can preserve our environment and do something good for the greater good. So that's kind of why. And we started with, we did build green training, which is kind of based on R2000. We worked on some lead projects. And then in 2006, we came across Passive House. I'm European originally, but I left too early to kind of experience it over there. So I connected with it here through an Austrian fellow, probably most people know in this area, Guido Wimmers, who brought the standard over here. And we became good friends, and so we got to work on some projects together and start to get introduced in the Passive House.
Fantastic. So was it a meeting with Guido, or what was sort of the big aha moment for you that Passive House made so much sense and that was the way to what to use moving forward?
Well, we were always focused on quality of building as well. So it really ends, modern design, and it really went really well hand in hand with the Passive House ideas. In this particular case, it was basically we got hired to build Robert Malchik from Equilibrium, one of the engineering companies here, his house, and Guido was actually working for him the first year he was in Canada. So we worked together on that place. It wasn't a certifiable passive house because of some city restrictions of heritage character. They had a big south-facing entry porch that had to be preserved, which pretty much cut down on all the potential solar gains. But we did all the principles. We used, insulated the slab really well. We used up-doing windows. We got the air tightness. It's the first time we tried to kind of get low with air tightness. We got it to 0.8, which I guess for the first try is not too bad. Obviously not good enough for a passive house. And we kind of got familiarized with the standards and the principles of passive house, and then it's a learning curve for sure. It's for everyone. It just kind of made sense because, like I said, it's not something complicated. Anyone can do it.
So with having to preserve the heritage nature of that home, were you still able to utilize the super insulation principles to help make that house more comfortable, or did you kind of have to abandon the facade that you had to preserve?
We did add extra insulation, and because they knew it was not going to make passive house, we didn't go to that same level, but we did a 2x6 structure with some exterior, 2 inches of exterior insulation, which is almost now what the Vancouver code is, right? It's a little bit better than what it's now. This was in 2006, so yeah. Yeah, and obviously the up-twin windows, that was a big, eye-opener to use a product like that, just the comfort. And even then, not being a complete passive house, the internal comfort is way better because of those windows and a bit of the extra insulation in the walls.
And it was a triple pane that you went with even then?
Yeah, it's the full passive house compatible window that you use. I think the city made us use wood windows outside as well. So again, because of the heritage character, and they're quite common in Europe. So obviously that wasn't a problem.
Cool. All right. So when we're talking about today, we want to talk about incorporating passive house right from the drawing stage. And it brings about a bit of a chicken and an egg. And I'm just curious on your approach. Should the homeowner find a builder and then bring them to their architect, or should they find an architect and then look for a builder?
I mean, we have both scenarios happening, and we're mainly a construction company, but we have architecturally trained staff. So we, especially with passive house, we've been getting more and more into design build, and there is some advantages to that, obviously, which I'll get into further later. And there's a lot of good planners here in Vancouver, and there are passive house trained. So it's just about the integrated planning process, really. So the earlier we can get on board, if the first contact point is the architect or us, it doesn't really matter as long as we don't get just, called when the plans are ready and let's go and build. Because we have some ideas how things can be done, and how things can be improved and made cheaper even to build.
So if somebody were to watch this and they were getting ready to build their own home, you just recommend making sure somebody's aware of the passive house process before they start to design?
For sure, yeah. You have to design with passive house in mind. It's very hard to just kind of put passive house on an already designed building and then think it's going to work. It's just, just from the orientation to the massing to the details, the thermal bridge-free details, all that, it has to be all considered already in the design stage.
So it's not like, I sort of asked this tongue in cheek, but it's not kind of like net zero where you could just add some solar panels at the end to,
that's right,
to make it work.
Yeah.
So then what would, if somebody came to you with the design, you did mention some, can you expand a little bit about recommendations you might have? Say they gave you their site, like site layout and stuff, how you'd recommend them proceed with the house?
So you mean if there's a design already in place, or if we start with the design ourselves?
Well, if they're looking, let's say they hadn't really fell in love with any plan in particular yet, but what would you coach them on as far as site layout and house design layout with regard to passive house?
The site is quite important, especially if you're in the city. I mean, you're kind of lucky where you are. You got a lot of open space, and you got southern exposure, and it's no problem to tap into those solar gains. Now, if you're in the city of Vancouver and you're in a tight lot and you got a high rise on the south side of your lot, probably won't be able to do a passive house. So obviously that's the first criteria. It has to be the right site. And if the goal is really to build a passive house, maybe you have to sell that lot and look for another one. So it starts there, and then depending on the lot layout, a lot of the city lots are really tight, so there's not a lot of wiggle room to kind of where to put what. And then depending if the entry to the house is on the south side or the north side, that makes a difference too, how to lay things out and how to open up glazing to the south. So all these criteria obviously matter. And then trees as well. Like we had a project in Vancouver Island, actually my business partner's house. He wanted yeah, to go passive, but he was on a north-facing slope with a big forest on the south side. So again, that was the kind of breaking point not to achieve passive house.
So
have to be considered, obviously.
So when you just to back up a little bit there, when you're talking about your partner's place with the trees on the south side, or if there was a high rise on the south side, it's I think it's important that we just clarify. It's not that you couldn't still build to passive house standard. It's just that by not receiving that solar gain, you might not achieve the requirement of the standard itself.
You won't be able to certify. You can still build with the principles of passive house, but you won't be able to get that. I mean, I'm talking single family homes now, right? So for a multifamily, it's completely different. The bigger the building, the easier it is to achieve the certification. So,
yeah, Scott.
A few cases where we knew that, like the first one we did in 2006, and then we did an infill house that had a big character house, like 4 stories on the south side in East Vancouver, and that was exactly the same problem there, but we still did everything like we would do it for a regular passive house. In the end, the heating demand was higher than the 15 kilowatt hours per square meter. They still have all the benefits, the comfort, the quality of the building that they would have otherwise. They just pay a little bit more for heating.
Right. Yeah, and that's the point that I wanted to make, was just to make sure that people understand if they don't have a beautiful backyard pointing to the south, it doesn't mean you should abandon passive house. It just means that you can still build a wonderful home. You just maybe don't meet the line that the Passive House Institute has drawn on what qualifies as a certified.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah, and I'm all for that. I mean, where I'm from in Switzerland, they adapted the passive house standard into their own system, and it's called Minergie, and it has different categories, and Minergie P being passive house being one of them at the higher level, and there's 3 levels below that, like bronze and a silver and gold. So I think that, I know the Germans want to have it all or nothing. That kind of, they're pretty strict with their things, but I think there is definitely a lot of value in getting almost there if you can't make it.
Yeah, and I think for us, it's nothing I've really said publicly, but we've built a passive house, but we won't get a certified passive house because my primary energy is too high. One of the measurements is how much primary energy you use in your home, and because the loads are so low, we've used an electric water tank and electric backup heat, and then when you put those into the planning spreadsheet, our primary energy, we're over by a little bit. So it doesn't.
The newer PHPP version?
I haven't put it into PHPP 9 yet. I have heard from a few different people that it might make a difference. Yeah. But at the same time, the point for me building this house was kind of that, was to show that even if I don't get a sticker from Germany, which I think is important. It's important to set those standards. But even without the sticker, I'm still living in a house that's wonderful. And there's a good chance that today, this will date this interview, but it's the 14th of November, and we haven't turned on the heat yet in our home. And it's always stayed between 19 and 21 degrees. And to me, with the current understanding of Passive House in Canada, I think that that's a much more important story than a little plaque on the outside of my home.
Yeah, and it has been cold. I mean, you probably had some almost 0 degree nights there, right, in Langley? Because we had 2 degrees in Vancouver in some mornings.
Yeah, I don't know that we've hit frost yet, but I do know we've seen like some 3 degree days and stuff. And it's really been interesting because generally the house tells you, when you wake up in the morning and it's like, ooh, it's a little bit extra chilly in here. It must really be cold outside. And for me, one morning I got up, I didn't even think about it. I look outside, I opened the door to go outside, and it was, whoa, why is it so cold? And I look, and it was 5 degrees, but there's no indication in the house except for the temperature gauge of what it's doing outside. Yeah. So So then maybe you can speak a little bit more about things that people can do if they're looking to improve the design of their house, whether passive or not, things they could do that would help make it more comfortable and livable from a design perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's the same for any design, right? Not specific to passive house. Those are just kind of architectural criteria to just them first. That's kind of the base that has to be there, right? So the layout is right, that there's enough space to accommodate all this, and there's enough daylight and all that. Just the kind of the basic of architecture, and that doesn't change with passive house. The only thing that changes is we got to consider where you put your windows, not only for light but also for energy reasons. So for getting passive solar from the south side and not to overheat at the same time, and not to have too many big windows on the north side. So those are kind of the passive house specific ones. Like really where we kind of find it pays off a lot to do the design build is to control the cost of a passive house. Because we can, from the beginning, we can design in some efficiencies that not every architect does, and a lot of them are very artistic and want to express that with like some crazy details. And doesn't mean that the way we design it's an ugly house, but it's just things like spans, for example. Like it starts with the structure, right? So when we design a building, we try to keep it to a kind of a comfortable span that can be done without any crazy beams or steel beams or really, really big structure. So that puts the cost down. And then also not to kind of use the most expensive finished materials. There's a lot of, products that are easily available that are off the shelf that look great if they're put into a good detail. And it doesn't have to be, something imported from Europe all the time.
Yeah, and I can definitely second that. I think that the only part really here that you imported was those fancy screws to put the insulation onto the side of the house.
Yeah, and that was a cost thing. Again, they were actually cheaper than using the JRK, which is Canadian or American. So yeah, things like that. I mean, you really kind of always want to have the cost in mind, because we want to make passive houses affordable. And I think the only way to do it is to really come from kind of a local view and do as much as possible the way you can to build other houses here, and not completely reinvent construction, because we want to have other builders do this too, and not just a few people with PhDs that understand the whole thing. So, that's kind of my approach to make passive house more affordable.
So if we just start at the very beginning, just little changes can make a big difference, as opposed to having it designed and then trying to figure out how to fit it in the passive house bag.
And it's it's a lot of little things that add up. A few $100 there, and maybe a few $1,000 on some of the bigger items, but it all adds up in the end, right? And then it makes a difference.
So what about things like basements? I know we built slab on grade partly by design, but I know that we do generally love putting a basement under a house. What would be your recommendations there with regards to passive house, and does it become part of the envelope, or does it stay outside, or maybe you can speak to that a little bit?
I'll definitely make it part of the envelope, and the decision to have a basement or not is really up to the owner. I mean, a lot of in the city, they want to have basement suites, or they're thinking about their resale value. That's extra square footage. It actually makes it easier to make it a passive house standard if you have a basement, because you have more treated floor area packed into your volume, so you can probably reduce some of the insulation on the rest of the house. But definitely part of the envelope, because otherwise, unless it's like a carport or a shop or something underneath that you're not eating. And
I know that when you speak to people about their regular homes, they might not understand comfort the way that we talk about it in the main floor of their house. But if you talk to them about their basement, I think everybody's pretty quick to admit that the basement is the cold place, as far as the floor and things. So maybe you can just speak a little bit to what you would do to make the basement insulated. Is that an inside or an outside, or how would you operate that?
We typically do an ICF, so that's an insulated concrete form. It's just an economic way of getting an insulated foundation wall, because you already have the EPS on both sides, and you have these ribs on the inside where you can just attach the drywall to it. Obviously, we have to add some additional to that on the outside. So typically, we would match the thickness of the insulation to what we do on the rest of the house, so the R value match to that. So really, it is not a different place than your main floor above ground rooms. It should be exactly the same comfort. Obviously, you'll have less windows, so probably it's even warmer than some of the upper floors, because you have the windows are always the weakest point in every building.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's not insulate completely around the slab and the foundation, if possible.
Yeah, and I think that's even when I speak to people now who are building conventional, they'll insulate their home, but they won't put anything more than the code minimum under the slab in the basement, and I just think it's a tough play, because I think it ultimately affects sort of the comfort of the whole home.
Yeah, exactly, and it's not that much more money to add a bit more insulation. That's easy stuff to do, right? It gets harder to add, get better windows, all that. So you want to kind of on the easy. That's another strategic thing to consider when you kind of design your envelope. You want to add insulation where it's easier to do, rather than having to get really high-end windows that have a better U value because you forgot or didn't put enough insulation on the slab.
Yeah, and so if you're just learning about the passive house, by their standards, they don't necessarily prescribe that there has to be a certain U value or an insulative value for a wall or a window, but it's measured more on the complete envelope of the structure. So when Marcel talks about not having to use this high performance window, by creating a better envelope all around, you have the opportunity to use. If you improve some stuff, then other stuff doesn't necessarily have to categorically jump as well.
Exactly. I mean, it's a very kind of dynamic system. I mean, the PHPP can play around with it. And again, that's why it's so critical to do that in the planning stage. I mean, you don't want to play around with it when you start building, which is kind of the case for any building. You want to be ready to go and have all the details and everything figured out before you're going to break ground. But even more so in a passive house, because of all these critical parameters that can make or break the passive house. And it's kind of fun to play around with it and see what happens. So to change the windows, take some insulation up there, and that's how you kind of get a feel for it. What does a passive house look like in our climate?
Yeah, and I know, talking to Lydia earlier from BC Passive House, she had talked about how they liked the modeling because it gave them an idea what was going to happen. But also when they finished the building, they could measure that the building was actually performing in accordance to what they'd calculated. So it's, it's not just a pie in the sky. This is the way it should work out, and then who knows?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's definitely the case with passive house.
So I just got a couple more questions before we answer some audience questions. But I was just curious: is there anything, looking back? Is there any things that you've learned that you'd like to share that that maybe over time you've become more efficient at, or better, or things you wish you'd have adopted
you mean
earlier?
In the construction, like in detailing and.
I mean, I don't want to make it too technical, but if there's any sort of high level things that you've learned over the last well, 2003. So that's, or even 2006. So over the last 10 years of doing Passive House, are there some things that you've learned along the way that you could share to some aspiring designers that would help them on their way?
Yeah, and builders. I mean, always the builder's challenge is always the air tightness, right? That's where we measure ourselves. You see a passive house builder, what numbers did he get to? And our approach is mostly you kind of do the belt and suspender thing where we try to hit it on a couple of layers. So we already air tighten our vapor barrier, and then we use our windbreak as well as our main air barrier. And by taping both of those, we get some really good results of air tightness. I think, Dale, in your house, it was around 0.3 or 0.4. That's typically what we have, somewhere around 0.3, sometimes even lower than that.
And I think there was an interesting distinction that night when we did the midpoint blower. They actually just did my new one yesterday. I haven't got the results yet, but you had said that air tightness is discipline. I don't know, maybe you can expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, it's discipline. You have to be there. You have to have someone who is there the whole time that gets put on, and make sure that you not miss a joint to tape, that you don't have a trade come in and just start drilling holes everywhere. Yeah, so it's a discipline exercise. And it's fairly easy to do in a single family home project. I guess it gets a bit more complicated the bigger the building is and the more trades you got running in. But I was in contact with Kevin Brennan from the Passive House Academy, and he's teaching a trades course in New York, and he's working on bigger buildings. And his profession was, he was an air tightness trade. He used to do that in buildings in New York. I didn't know that existed. And now in Passive House, they actually, they have site meetings to get all the trades together in the beginning of the project, and they tell them, this is what it is, even if you don't understand all the building physics, but this is important, and we make you accountable for this too. So if you start, cutting our air barrier, then you got to pay us to fix it. And they actually had a video home automation guy that started just going wild and drilling holes everywhere, and they backcharged him, and I think he's still working with them, but now he knows that can't do it. So yeah, that's
I do know
the air tightness thing. Generally, I would say try to keep it simple. Don't try to overcomplicate it. Use a lot of local products, local construction techniques, because those are the ones that you can get material easily, so you don't get stuck waiting for stuff coming across borders, or there's strikes on ports that you're waiting for material. That's critical. So that all helps. And the more we do this here, the more local products will be available. And the easier we'll get for everyone.
Absolutely. Yeah, make sure that everything's got a CMCC number or is they approved. That's a little tip there. So was there anything else that I didn't ask that you wanted to cover today?
No, I think that's good. We can maybe see if someone in the audience has some questions.
All right. Well, just before I go to questions, I do want to ask if people want more information. You want to give your website now, and I'll put it in the show notes. Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's www.econgroup.ca. And we have most projects will have a blog for the project, so you can kind of see what's going on. And a lot of time the homeowner who starts that and keeps it up to date, and we pitch in whenever we can.
Or they start it and then finish it. I did shoot video. I do want a guilty admission. I did shoot video all the way through. I just haven't got it all uploaded yet. So at some point here on Stumbling Greenward, you'll be able to see all the build. And I do try and announce once in a while that when I say that we've built or we've done so-and-so, that actually the credit goes to Marcel and his crew for a lot of that, getting us to lock up. So
thanks. Yeah.
Really grateful to work with you. And that's why I was excited to bring you on. I know you know your stuff, and I think there's a lot of value there. So With that being said, I see there are a few questions here, so I'll read them out, and then if you want to answer, Cameron's asked, does PHP9 benefit smaller houses more than 8?
No, there's no change in that. The only thing that changed is the primary energy parameters. So now they're presuming that all the energy, like they're looking kind of in the future, 50 years from now, and they're saying all energy is produced sustainable. And it's in BC, when we're on the grid, on the hydro grids, they recognize that it's hydro generated power. So we'll get a better source. It's called source energy factor, whatever that factor is called. Because before it was like 2.6 or something, and now it's better. I haven't actually tried it myself yet, but I'm going to enter a project I'm working on now in 9 and see what the difference is.
Perfect. And then Cameron made a comment, with land costs in Vancouver, basement's critical, and I think that's what you're speaking to about rental space and just sort of maximizing. Right. And then he asks, isn't ICF expensive? So when we were talking about basements.
No, I mean, if you factor in that you normally would have a frame, a wall, and all that, it's actually cheaper than, especially when you get into really insulated basements as well. It used to be probably kind of more like a fringe product that was more expensive, but now it's so common that so many people are using it, and it really speeds up. You save a lot on labor, and labor is kind of what always is the most expensive part. And if you can save on that, it's definitely a great way to go.
Perfect. And then I think to our last conversation there about having something with a CMCC number, CSA, how do you get around inspectors who want ULC listed materials and products when many of the Passive House products aren't yet rated here? I'll start that conversation, I guess. Some of the building inspectors will accept a letter of equivalency from a consultant, a registered consultant, and effectively that kind of shifts responsibility to that consultant's care. That being said, if you're doing a multi-unit, you might be able to have the budget to take on a consultant that'll help with those letters and the details and the choosing of those products. If it's a single family owner builder, that might add additional charge where you might want to just have a discussion with people in the Passive House community as well as your authority having jurisdiction to see if you can come to terms with materials that are acceptable to them and also can be used as part of the Passive House assembly to achieve the same goal, so that you can avoid having to employ that consultant to write the equivalency letter. So Marcel, I don't know if you have anything.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, that's kind of when it comes down what you have to do. If you can't, reason with the inspector, maybe just say, try to maybe talk to the inspectors before and see, this is what I'm going to use. And, we have been using that in different jurisdictions. They might have some other inspector friends there that have seen it. So it's always the unknown, right? They haven't seen it, they don't know what it is, and it's going to be bad because they've never seen it before. So that's kind of the attitude. But if they actually know what the product is and that it's definitely way better than tar paper.
Yes. But it has been a learning experience, and I think some of those details, if you have a feeling that it's something different than conventional, what I learned is that I should bring it up earlier, even if it looks like everybody's okay with everything. And that's where I'll leave that. Was there any other?
Have some Passive House champions in the municipalities, and I've been lucky enough to work in a few municipalities like that. And we need more people like that because they're working from the inside out, and they help us a lot to build passive houses.
Yeah, and I think once they're aware that they're, as we get successful products here, especially on the coast, they can see them working in an environment and then that just sort of builds their level of trust. And I think even, the city of Vancouver has really been reaching out to try and help the community the best they can as well. So it's kind of working from both sides from what I've been hearing. And then we'll call that a wrap. So I really appreciate everybody taking part in International Passive House Day as part of their Saturday. And for you, Marcel, thank you so much for being a part of this.
Thanks, Dale. Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure. And I'm glad you're doing something like this. We need lots of these things.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Stumbling Greenward podcast. You can access links to all the resources that were mentioned in this podcast at stumblinggreenward.com/podcast and clicking on this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, I recommend you check out some of the other podcasts, including jargon-free interviews on Windows, multi-unit construction, passive house development, and much more. Before you go, I'd be eternally grateful if you were to share this interview with others, and be sure to click subscribe on iTunes. Thanks, and have a great day.